Welcome to the webinar. So many employers today are grappling with how to handle remote work post-pandemic. They're considering whether to bring workers back to the office or to continue to offer remote work. And if they continue to offer remote options, under what terms? Today's guest speaker will talk about how employers can use people analytics to help answer these questions about the future of remote work. Our guest speaker is Timothy Peppers, Organization and Talent Analytics Lead at Philip Morris International. Tim is a strategic workforce planning and people analytics thought leader and practitioner covering a wide range of topics and roles, including talent analytics, employee listening, forecasting, organizational health, and HR technology implementation. He is currently working for Philip Morris International, building the strategic workforce planning capability using advanced data science techniques to understand what skills employees have, what our future workforce will look like, and how technology will impact the workforce as we continue down the path of digitizations and the AI augmented workplace. So with that, I would like to welcome Tim.
Cool. Thank you for having me, everyone. And I hope everyone has a useful webinar today. Please do put questions in the chat. I know I kind of sometimes get accused of talking a bit too quick or getting a bit too technical because I'm a big HR data geek. So if there's anything that you don't understand or I'm not being clear, do put questions in the chat. I'll aim to answer them as we go along. Otherwise, we have the Q&A section afterwards. But obviously, if there's something I said in the first 5 minutes that makes no sense, please do ask, because please don't suffer in silence. I'm going to attempt to give you both the simple version of all the different ways that we can look at how people analytics can help the return to office, but also the super advanced and technical ones as well. And if you have any questions about anything in between, more than happy to expand. I've worked in large organizations where I've managed data scientists doing some very advanced and overcomplicated stuff. And I've worked in very small organizations where our main tool has been Excel and conversation. So really can hopefully, if you have questions or you'd like some advice, no matter what kind of organization you work for, or what kind of competency level, or what kind of technical abilities you have, please do ask, and I'll try and tailor my advice and answers as much to your business problem as possible. Before we get into remote working and hybrid working, I just want to give a little bit of context about myself, non-professionally, and kind of talk about how we got here. And talk a little bit about the pandemic. Obviously, I think most companies in the UK, and I'm guessing in the US, around March, April time last year is when we went into lockdown. And it's been a very busy time for me, just over a year. We welcomed our first son, first child, Oscar, into the world in June. He's just turned 1. And this is Data Ninja sleep suit that my workmates got me. They also got me a trainee data scientist sleep suit, and also a load of books about Bayesian theory and probability. So I'm guessing I need to talk more of my workmates about my other hobbies and passions, because they just thought, yep, he just loves data. But he's been a definite challenge, but a definite blessing within the pandemic. Personally, I thought I'd take the opportunity to kind of upskill myself. I've always wanted to do this niche data science project around image recognition. So I bought myself, not long after the start of the pandemic, a very fancy data science laptop, and it's mostly been used as a heat pad for my cat Beyonce, who is in the top left and is actually sitting just down here having a nap next to me. It's also been used to play videos for Oscar when he's joined me in the office for meetings. So really haven't made much progress in terms of my pet project. One thing I have learned to do, though, is around Christmas time, I was thinking about what do I want for Christmas, and I definitely missed human interaction and meeting other people and being around friends. So I decided to get myself a hardcore barbecue, although I'm talking to mostly Americans, so it's probably not that hardcore, but a smoker, and have learned the art of low and slow over the last 6 months. And recently have, as lockdown has eased, we've actually been able to do a few barbecues for friends and family, doing T-bone steaks and brisket and so on. So that has been a new skill that I've learned and enjoyed very much. But generally, it's just been myself and Beyonce in this chair right here, sitting in my home office from 8 a.m. till whenever I finish work, and then maybe coming back later to do online shopping and whatever else I need to do on the computer. And I guess that's the theme of the talk, really, because essentially what's happened in the last year and a half is that the workplace has changed. We've gone from a physical workplace to kind of a metaphysical workplace, this kind of digital workplace where instead of interacting physically and meeting and having a kind of, physical place where we go to work versus a physical place where we go home and sleep, it's kind of blurred. And we have these kind of what I would call kind of invisible walls, which is this kind of a gaming and a data engineering terms when you kind of play a computer game and there's a part of the game you can't go into, but you can see it, but there's a sort of invisible wall that stops you going into there. And I think it's kind of a nice little analogy of kind of where I think a lot of employees have struggled working from home because, physically they were going to the office, then going home, and there's a delineation between work and home. And now I think a lot of people, I don't know from the data we have at Philip Morris, people are struggling is that line is now very, well, it's invisible. You're kind of literally yards away from your dining table or your bedroom, or some people even working in their own bedroom, really struggling with that kind of work-life balance and putting those kind of checks and balances in place to make sure that work life doesn't creep into personal life or even vice versa. So it's not all doom and gloom, though, because essentially this kind of new workplace, this digital workplace, has kind of its perks. So we can be a lot more productive, but also digital workplaces have what we call digital footprints, right? So now that we're not interacting physically and kind of talking within the office, we're doing everything online. Essentially what happens when you do anything online, there's always a footprint that follows you. So I've kind of pulled up one example of our kind of digital workplaces. So this is a sample of my Outlook emails. You can download these yourself if you just go into the Outlook and options, but you can also do this for Teams or any other app if you have the right accesses. And essentially all the interactions that you do get recorded, what we call metadata. So we're not looking at people's actual emails, but we're looking around the detail behind that. So whenever an email goes from or to an email server, there's a record that's created. And I'm just going to use this example of ways that we can understand exactly how work is happening in this new digital workplace. And this is where people analytics can tap into these data sets and really understand what's happening and what are the ramifications of that. But let's break down what we can get from this very simple, 6-7 columns or so of data. But first of all, we can see when emails have been sent, or when emails replied, or even actually when you go into your emails and read your emails. Okay, so that little tick that you have on Teams or whichever app you're using, or the little eye thing when you're looking at it, again, as soon as that changes, there's a little log that says Tim is looking at this Teams message. Tim is looking at this email. And we can understand when are people working, right? When are people logging on, doing work? When are people logging off? Maybe if they've got, childcare, I've got to take care of Oscar from 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock, I'll log off and then I'll log back in on the evenings to catch up on emails if I had a busy day of meetings. We can also see what kind of interactions I'm doing. Am I sending emails? Am I having calls through Teams? Am I actually in scheduled meetings? If I'm in a meeting, am I also emailing? So I'm actually focusing on that meeting. Is that a productive meeting? We can find all that from just the logs of when and where we're emailing and when we're interacting. We can also find out who we're interacting with. Okay, so I can see who I'm emailing and who's emailing me. And once we have these two things, we can also start establishing relationships, right? If I email you and you don't email me back, we probably don't have a great relationship. If you email me and I email back and we email very quickly, so we can start gauging, okay, they have a pretty good relationship. We can also see if I log in, and I think in the example I must have logged in around 7 a.m. and I've replied to 3 or 4 emails, we can also see who I replied to quickly. Who's the first person I replied to? So then we can start understanding influence, okay? So if, I think in this example, Bash is the first person I replied to. Once we kind of aggregate that and keep on analyzing it, we can start understanding, okay, maybe, in the hierarchy of who's most important, it might be Bash, it might be Ashish, and then, who do I reply to later, Dagmara? They're less influential. So we start understanding how the networks, how we're collaborating, who we're talking to, and the importance of those individuals, and start gauging who is struggling and who is really doing well in terms of meetings online. We can also understand, if you're accepting meetings or if you're double booked for meetings, who you're choosing to meet with, again, in terms of influence. And we can also look at wider team meetings. So that big number 6 there, right in the middle, that's a big team meeting. So our team's meeting and having big town halls. How long are those meetings? Are they productive? Is that helping connectivity or not? So we can suddenly start inferring a whole load of information from just very simple metadata, and then understanding how organizations are interacting and how that's changed from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, and then potentially what we need to look out for when we go back to the office, when we start making those decisions we talked about around who goes back to the office, how, when, what for, and also what we need to look out for. So before we get into that, let's have a little look and then put this into, so I've just seen the comment, Big Brother is watching. Big Brother does have to comply to legal and data privacy agreements, but yes, there's a whole lot of information that we can infer. And yes, if you have questions around it, more than happy to talk about the ethics and so on of this as well, because it is a really big topic. What do we use this for? Anyway, here's some examples of what we're seeing. And this is a Microsoft study through that's available online through their work lab space. And essentially, what they saw during the pandemic for Microsoft is that even a company that's obviously uses Teams and is very digitally enabled, during the pandemic, they've seen meetings increase by 148%. Okay, so 2.5 times more meetings. So people are suddenly jam-packed all day in meetings, working much longer days. They're seeing email volume spike, 40 extra billion emails, chat up by 45%, and then collaboration through online docs up by 2/3. Okay, so you see now people suddenly, when they move away from their office, they're collaborating much more online, but a huge amount more meetings. So all those kind of informal conversations that you'd usually have in the office, huge spike, and then obviously meetings tend to be a lot longer as well. The problem there, if we go to the bottom left in the corner, is that yes, people are collaborating, but what they're seeing is actually people are collaborating within their own direct team, and actually that wider teamwork in those wider collaborations, meeting with other teams, is dropping. Okay, which causes some issues. Number one, it's implying that silo work is happening. Number two is a real problem in terms of potentially around innovation, right? Innovation doesn't really happen very well in bubbles, right? So what we're seeing is actually teams are being communicating, collaborating very intensely, but within their own teams. So for me, and I think this is true, I used to work with finance and commercial teams in different areas, different markets. And actually what we found and we'll kind of see is actually I talk a huge amount with my direct reports and my manager and my sort of local team, but actually some of those looser connections, some of those weaker connections, I no longer have regular catch-ups with. And then what we're seeing in the top right is a decrease in what we call connectivity, okay? And this is more around surveys, but you can still see it through the data, is that as people's networks start to shrink and collaboration starts to reduce, people are finding that actually they're feeling less of a belonging. They're feeling like less that they're part of the company, they're only really part of a very small team. And that has a huge impact on employee well-being, employee retention. So really having an understanding that, sort of you're still part of this wider picture, you're still part of this wider company, is super important. And also our current hypothesis, which is a real big focus for us at PMI at the moment, is that essentially this lack of collaboration and this lack of connectivity is really hurting people's purpose and health and hampering well-being. The last thing is at the bottom right is the pre-COVID and COVID relationship between the managers. What we see is that interaction within teams is making managers a lot more influential, things in terms of engagement and also in terms of connectivity and well-being. So suddenly the importance of a manager being a really strong manager and having those really great leadership skills, having regular one-to-ones, being a strong communicator, spending time with their team becomes even more important. And again, we're seeing this within the data that we have locally, is actually while scores are generally pretty good for overall sort of a customer engagement and employee engagement, I should say, what we're seeing is huge amounts of variation from manager to manager as we work remotely within our teams. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There's also quite high productivity, right? So people are taking that commute and actually working longer. People are actually working more efficiently. There's better collaboration online. There's less time wasted. The amount of meetings and recurring meetings where people don't attend drops. So actually, it's not all doom and gloom. You're seeing a lot of real benefits. The question is, how, when we go back to the office, how do we maximize those opportunities? How do we retain that productivity? How do we retain the efficiencies that we're getting through online collaboration, and also, kind of being able to focus, not having the distractions of the office, versus some of those risks around lack of connectivity, around lack of collaboration, and also around, potential influence of the manager. So this is where we kind of pick up the story, especially around Philip Morris. This is where we start trying to answer some of those questions that hopefully you guys are also trying to answer, which is, okay, when we go back to the office, what do we do? Do we go back to the office? Why do we go back to the office? When do we go back to the office? With whom? And what do we do at the office? Okay. Because I think the other thing about productivity is I think we've all understood, with some exceptions, that we can work from home. This whole, people just in their pajamas and slacking off and cuddling cats isn't really true. We can still get the work done remotely. The key is, how do we balance the right balance of working from home versus working from the office? So at Philip Morris, we did an experiment with one of our markets. So we had a couple of thousand people within this country. And again, if you think about a digital workplace and those footprints that leave behind, every time you go into your office and you swipe your ID card, there's a little log saying you entered through this building or you entered through this door. And every time you swipe out, you left. So what we did is we leveraged that data to understand, for this country where lockdown restrictions were eased and employees had the option to go back to the office, we looked over, as a 10-week period, so 2.5 months, who went back to the office, why, and then looked at how they were responding in their employee engagement surveys. And what we found was pretty interesting, right? The employees who did not go into the office at all or went into the office less than once a week actually had negative ENPS scores, so employee net promoter scores, how we measure our engagement scores. Employees who went at least once a week kind of had a little bit of positive employees net promoter scores, but well below the company average. And actually, people who are going back to the office really 3 to 4 times a week were having really, really good employee net promoter scores. They were real promoters to the company and, very engaged employees. Not quite so much those who were going 5 days a week, but that was quite a small sample size as well. But we thought, okay, the question isn't so much there's one question, which is, how often should you go to the office? Because we are thinking about implementing hybrid work, where essentially employees have the option to work from home or work from the office, but there's certain rules that we're going to put around. So one is, what is the minimum amount of days? The second one was, why do you go into the office and who you should go into the office? So we looked at the same data, but instead of just looking who was going to the office, we also looked at, were you going to the office on the same day as your manager? So were you having that face-to-face interaction versus people who were not having that face-to-face interaction? Either they were just working from home or they were going to the office but not seeing their manager. The interesting thing is here is, it's followed a very similar pattern, but actually the real kind of the golden sort of, the right kind of range was really seeing your manager 2 to 4 times a week. What we saw is actually, if you're seeing your manager 5 days a week, we saw a real drop in employee net promoter score. Now, we don't know exactly why. It's not causal. We don't know if it's because of the role type, or maybe, there's implications that might be kind of, too much contact and not enough focus time to get work done, or maybe some managers are micromanaging. We don't know, but it's giving us really good data around, okay, at the very least, if you're going into the office, you should definitely at least once or twice a week be going in and having that face-to-face human interaction with your manager, because the data shows that actually, yes, having that human interaction with your manager improves your ENPS score and actually facilitates you having better conversations. Having got it here, we also looked at all the different dimensions of the survey around, feedback and manager has career conversations and so on, which again, the right kind of ratio is at least 2 days a week. The last way we looked at it is around collaboration within the team. So we looked at, okay, when you go into the office, are you seeing the majority of your team? Are you seeing no teammates? Are you seeing some teammates, maybe one or two? And what we found is actually the people who are going in and seeing a large amount of their team, so the majority of their team when they visited the office, huge ENPS rise. Everyone else, if they weren't seeing that team, if they weren't having that interaction with the rest of their colleagues, generally pretty much either negative ENPS or I think the ENPS of maybe one. So what we had to start getting was a really good idea of, okay, when should we go to the office? We should definitely think about trying to have those face-to-face interactions with our manager, but also we should be trying to advocate for teams to have team office days. So really thinking about why do we go to the office? Well, the reason you go to the office, have that human interactivity, have that collaboration, and actually do all those networking or those conversations within the team, both to help communication, but also help foster that feeling of belonging within different teams. So what do we need to go back into the office to do is a bit of a tougher question. Okay, so what we've seen in the last year is actually we can do most of our roles remotely. Obviously, at Philip Morris, we have manufacturing roles, we have retail roles, we have certain roles where we need to go into the office or into a factory. But mostly our employees have been able to perform their roles and their functions and their tasks remotely. However, we have had some serious challenges, especially in certain areas. So we tried to really have a deep dive into what exactly is driving that and how can we understand who should go back to the office and why. So what we've done is we've partnered with an organization, but I can share with you how to do it in a more simple fashion. But essentially what we've tried to do is break down all the different tasks that employees do. Okay, so this is an example of I think a data science manager. So categorizing all of our different job titles of our different employees into quite generic roles based on skills, based on tasks. And then what we've done is we've used a lot of what we call passive data to understand exactly what those people are doing and how much of their time is spent doing all those tasks. So we've built a task taxonomy, and you can see here analyzing data, analyzing financial data, supervising personnel. And then what we've done is we've leveraged different data sources. So I've put a few examples here, but essentially, you've got a ton of data within your HR systems that's going to give you a really good, you've almost got essentially a dissertation of exactly what people do. If you think about, in your HR system, you've probably got job descriptions. When you were recruited in your ATS or recruitment system, you've probably got the job advert that we published saying exactly what this person's going to do. Every year, ideally, employees should be doing their objectives. That should be detailing exactly what people are trying to accomplish this year. That should be ideally updated and refreshed as we continuously improve performance. Then we also got old data. We've got job titles. We've got your team name. We've got your manager's job title. We've got a whole load of other information around your function and whatever else we're doing. We might even have some skills data as well if we've got that talent management system and LMS system. So we've got this ton of information around exactly what you do in your organization. So if you have a population and you can kind of do that manual matching exercise, and you can do this on Excel as you create your task taxonomy. These are the different tasks you'll be doing. Again, if you're wanting to kind of supercharge that, look at your job adverts, you look at job descriptions, look at common words that are coming up. You can then go out to the business and ask people just to fill in very briefly, kind of exactly how much percentage of your time do you spend on these tasks. And then you can, if you want to, and if you have the skills, then use that and as a sort of what we call a learning training data set, and then do some machine learning algorithms using natural language processing to understand, okay, from this sample size, we can extrapolate that to the rest of the organization. Now, it's not a perfect thing. Everyone's going to do their role slightly differently. Everyone's going to want to do, you might have, if I take the example on the screen here, supervising personnel activities. If you're a manager of a large team, obviously you're going to be spending more time than a smaller team. If you have, I don't know, if you're a data science manager, actually a lot of your team are interns, you'll probably spend a bit more time on that versus, a manager who's got a very experienced team who are very independent. But essentially, this is giving us a kind of starting position to understand, right, what are the different things that people are doing within the organization at a very high level? And then we can go through those tasks and understand, can they be done remotely? And do they require human interaction? Because in that research we've done around attending the office and what the O&A data, that metadata from emails and Outlook and Teams is showing is that actually you can do human interaction online, but actually online is not necessarily the best way to go, especially for those kind of meaningful interactions, those career conversations, those one-to-ones, those performance reviews. So once you've classified all the tasks, we have this metric called remoteability. The remoteability is essentially your ability to do work online versus the risks of doing work remotely or online. Okay, and broke it into a pretty simple 2x2. But if if you can do work remotely, then obviously your role will be higher up. If you require human interactivity, your role will be more to the right. And essentially, then we can start breaking down our return to work plans in terms of risk buckets. Okay, which roles can be done remotely? Which ones will we run a risk if they are done remotely? And I think maybe if I move on to the next slide, this will bring it a bit more into life. Okay, so these are very generic roles and very high level roles. This is where we can start to understand, what are the job roles, what percentage of roles can be done online, and where the risks are. So if you think about the bottom left here, so right in the corner, those are a lot of our technical manufacturing production roles. You can't really do a whole lot of your factory job sitting at home. If your job is putting stuff into a machine and taking stuff out, obviously you need to go back to the plant, to the workshop, to the factory. If you're in the top left, then actually these are the roles that are very much suited to be working remotely, right? And there's probably no huge surprises here. Financial analysts, analytics managers, procurement. If you're working online, actually very much a specialist role. There's not really a huge amount of risk. Why would you force them to come back to the office? What's interesting is when we move further to the right. So if we think about the extreme right, we have HR specialists, we have HR managers, okay? So again, we know from the pandemic, we could do those roles remotely. The problem is those roles rely heavily on really good human interaction. And I feel like a complete robot when I say human interaction, but stakeholder management, building trusting relationships, influencing. And what we see both externally and internally is that those are the roles that have really struggled during the pandemic, both from a kind of well-being and engagement point of view, but also from a productivity point of view. And I think that's where a lot of the, where you hear a lot of the noise around return to work is often from senior leaderships. They're what's known as the influencers, okay? Yes, they can do their meetings online, but actually they've been generally very successful influencing people. That's a role, convincing people to do stuff, interacting, building those relationships, having that strong stakeholder management. It's difficult to do that online. So whilst HR managers and HR specialists, for example, can work remotely, we need to be really careful on two dimensions when we sort of say, you can continue to work from home. One is around a productivity point of view. Can they influence and build their stakeholder relationships online, especially with new relationships? So the research says that, yes, kind of remote working is very doable, and you can, sort of do these kind of interactions online. But often one of the key indicators of whether it's successful or not is whether the early interactions were meaningful, okay? So if you're onboarding or you're building a relationship with a new stakeholder, you need to have a meaningful interaction early on. And obviously, dialing in to a Teams call, cameras off, just getting straight into business is not necessarily a very strong way to build relationships. So we need to be careful of the risks. The other way that we found that is really interesting in human activity, and this is kind of, we have some data to support this, but we're trying to go deeper into this hypothesis, is really around the need for human interaction. So we're not going out and doing psychological tests for everyone, but what we're seeing is, especially from a well-being lens, is that the people who are in roles, especially sales roles, account managers, and then again, these kind of HR specialists and these kind of marketing and comms roles, they're often the ones who are really suffering in terms of well-being and psychological health, because what we're seeing is those people are probably taking those roles, getting into those professions because they love that human interaction. They're extroverts, it gives them energy to have those relationships. And that's the area of the workforce that maybe internally there may be some risk, because they bring joy, they bring energy, and their outlook is kind of fueled by having that close interaction. So again, we really need to think about our return to work in terms of potential, but also risks. So I believe almost doing well for time, so please do get your questions in. What I want to talk a little bit around is then kind of going beyond that return to work. So obviously this is a hot topic at the moment in terms of how do we approach our return to work, how do we sort of manage, and how do we maximize productivity versus managing risks. But once we have this remoteability data, I think it unlocks a huge amount of other potential. One really big one is around, and this is kind of my area of expertise, is around strategic workforce planning, right? We now know that obviously a lot of roles can be done remotely, and a lot of companies a real problem is recruiting talent. Well, now, because we have confidence that work roles can be done remotely, that suddenly opens us up to recruiting from further afield. I think there's a psychological change in terms of leadership being open to actually having a much more disparate workforce, working in different time zones, working in different locations, and that suddenly opens up the ability for us to recruit into new areas geographically. But again, we want to understand which of the roles that we could really resource, and which are the roles that we can recruit in those different areas where we need to think about, opening up our location strategies, so accessing cheaper talent, but also talent, greater amount of talent where there isn't such competition, but also just being careful as well that we're accommodating that talent properly. So yes, we may find that if so I'm based in the UK in London, maybe there's better data science talent in Scotland or in Manchester. Long term, that could be a great talent pipeline for us, because we're less, if I'm going to be visiting the office 2 days a week going forwards, it's absolutely fine for us to be managing people remotely. However, we also want to think about accommodating, okay, during that onboarding period, when they're building those new relationships, do we need to think about bringing that talent in for that induction, for those early meetings, for those project kickoffs, so we're having that meeting interaction, and we're kind of building those stronger relationships that then are going to be enabled for that kind of hybrid working going forward. The other thing that I've talked on it quite a bit, because it's actually quite a big topic for us at the moment, is about employee well-being. Okay, what are the risks of working remotely? Where do we need to be very conscious that we need to be thinking about supporting certain roles, certain tasks, certain employees? And also, what are going to be the ramifications, but also the opportunities? So, again, I don't want to come across as saying, remote working has been a huge challenge and actually we should all go back to the office. Quite the opposite. It's really about understanding where are the risks and where are the opportunities. But and I'll be interested to hear your questions and your topics as well. But for us, there's been some huge challenges in terms of well-being over the last 18 months, but there's also been some opportunities. And I can speak for myself, not being able to commute and enabled me to spend a huge amount of time with my son, and then and actually allowed me to do things and actually have, in some ways, a much better work-life balance. So it's about harnessing the best of both worlds. Something that we're working on, especially with certain areas of our commercial and operational areas, and where we're using this remoteability data, is around employee sustainability. So, as we move into new markets, as we dial up production in certain areas of the globe, as we dial down certain products and certain production, what we traditionally have done is kind of hired in the new area and then got rid of staff in other areas, or let attrition kind of wind down certain areas. What remoteability does is actually gives us a much better idea of, okay, what tasks can be done in a different location. So again, I know there's some kind of tax issues around obviously working in different areas in different countries, but if if demand is dialing down within certain markets, within a commercial function or a manufacturing area, and actually you have those tasks available in other areas, you can actually leverage and move that workforce into those different areas or supporting different locations, different factories, much easier these days. So another huge area is actually really trying to limit the hiring and firing and the amount of redundancy we have to make, because now we can reallocate tasks and projects to different areas. We're currently experimenting with an internal talent marketplace that's going to help us mix and match. Okay, where do we have a surplus of resource, and where actually do we need to have that resource? Where is the demand in different locations, so that different locations can talk to each other, and we can allocate tasks over different geographic borders. So that's a huge area for us, and again, a huge area that we can make a lot of impact with this remoteability data, understanding where we can repurpose employees because they have skills and tasks that can be used elsewhere. The last one, just before we go into the Q&A, and I think that a really strong reason to start building this remoteability data is around diversity and inclusion. One of, again, a huge priority at Philip Morris International, and I'm sure other companies as well. But another area that we're really looking at and using this data is looking at career planning and succession planning for employees who might not necessarily be able to have the same mobility as other employees. So traditionally, you know, primary carers, people have care responsibilities, people have disabilities, are not necessarily employees who can just up and move and, you know, get on a plane to Venezuela because their next career opportunity is there. So when we think about using this data, one of the ways we're using this data is to kind of look at career pathing and look at succession planning, going, okay, what opportunities are available that's going to meet your career aspirations, that's going to, you know, give us as a company the ability to move you in areas where we want you to develop to kind of fulfill that long-term succession plan. But those tasks can be done remotely, or could be done remotely 2-3 days a week, and then we're limiting to your travel the rest of the week. So really thinking about using this data to better allocate and better plan career paths for some of our top talent that, you know, can't necessarily do the traditional model of just moving around if they have care responsibilities or other limitations that are going to infringe their mobility. So I really do believe this remoteability data, I know I've given you the kind of the more technical version, you know, using data science, but, you know, even if we can create this data just through Excel, just for looking at high level tasks and understanding which roles and which tasks can be done remotely and where the risks are, we can suddenly really start redesigning a lot of our HR processes in terms of acquiring talent, retaining talent, redeploying talent, and then also nurturing talent and really improving our diversity, inclusion, and well-being, and getting a competitive advantage. And I think that's going to be, for me, a huge, huge theme over the next year, 18 months. You know, how do we adjust to this new way of working? How do we maximize these opportunities where we can recruit and recruit from different areas and access new talent markets, but also retain the right talent, make sure that we're still getting the productivity and not burning out our employees. So I hope that was useful. I've seen a few questions and comments coming into the chat, but thank you so much for your time, and please do post questions, and thank you so much for your time.
And just thank you so much, Tim, for sharing what I think is a really innovative approach to you know, a really timely and common challenge that employers are having today. And I would like to invite listeners, if you haven't already, to please go ahead and submit questions that you have for Tim, and I'll be happy to facilitate some Q&A with Tim. I did want to say, Tim, you know, two things that really stand out to me is that your approach is very company and role specific. And I think so often the talk around remote work decisions is relying on studies across many organizations, and they're more generic. And what you have done is really created an approach that can provide something that's really tailored to the company and specific roles in that company. The other thing that really stood out to me is your focus on well-being. So much, we read about productivity and that being a really big concern, and justifiably, but your focus on employee belonging and well-being as well, I think is really, really valuable reminder to kind of balance both of those things when we talk about remote work.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, data is always an enabler and a tool. So, and I love data. So, the initial need for remoteability data was was driven by this kind of return to work and this, sort of job resilience. But once you have it, and then you can then very quickly apply it to different use cases. And what we've seen is actually, yeah, for most everyone went to lockdown. We actually had sort of really good scores in kind of surveys. But then what we found is eventually, as the pandemic dragged on, especially longer than I think most people anticipated, that's when we started seeing in our pulse surveys, like continuous listening, that well-being was an issue that people were kind of starting to voice, and yeah, and this is just one of the different data sources that we're using to really address that problem and try to understand, where is it, because one of the things that any people analysts will tell you is that the averages are evil, right? Your well-being as a company score just means nothing. It means you could have half the company who are super excited and love working there, and half the company are massively unhappy. So it's when you start breaking down and really trying to understand exactly, actually what's happening, who is doing well in this pandemic, who is really struggling, and start to sort of peel back those start hypothesizing and try and peel back those reasons why, and we can understand, that's when we can make, I think, really meaningful interventions that's going to really be appropriate to certain employees. So that's a huge part of our philosophy around employee experience. Is the same as treating our employees like a commercial company, or like we treat our customers, right? Not every customer is the same. Let's find out, who are the employee personas that are struggling, who are the employee personas who, potentially could be working well from home, and then let's make sure that our plans and our return to work or our well-being strategies have something that's going to enable them to succeed. So yeah, I think, and it's really great to work on that. Again, I think the last slide talked about, HR data for good. Yeah, absolutely. It may not sound like the most sexy thing, but yeah, this is really exciting that we can use this data to really drive what I would say is really a strong, tangible, and positive impact within the company.
Sure. So as you can see, and I'll read out loud, we do have a listener question. This question and comment is, our company is allowing employees to continue working remotely. As a project manager, this makes celebrating project success more difficult. In the past, we would go to a local eatery and spend time together, drinking and eating. Do you have any suggestions on how to celebrate successes remotely? And he shares, another Zoom meeting sounds more like a punishment than a presentation celebration.
Yeah, no, we've had a few project celebrations remotely, and it is awkward and difficult. No, I think the key is really breaking down what are the different things you need to do. So obviously in a project, there's some bonuses of working remotely, and there's some things that are much better done in person. The advice I would give is if we can't, unless you are really good at doing these kind of things or put a lot of effort remotely, I think for me, and this is the approach that we're really taking at Philip Morris, is taking the attitude that everyone's going to have to make sacrifices. So again, we're allowing people to work remotely, but we're also being kind of clear that it's got to be a solution that fits everyone, right? So even if you really want to work remotely 5 days a week and you don't feel that, if you're doing an end of project, you could just do it over Zoom, there needs to be a certain amount of sacrifice, and that needs to go from the top down right to the bottom. Is everyone's got to make a certain amount of sacrifice, and actually everyone's going to have to go into the office or have those interactions or travel a certain amount. In order for everyone to then be able to access those other things. It can't just be a free-for-all. It can't just be a pick and mix, and because you are losing so much. So I think that's kind of that's one of the lessons that we have learned so far in terms of our work, and that's where we've kind of seen a lot and kind of we talk a lot with other organizations as well, is that I think sacrifice to a certain extent from everyone is going to enable everyone to have a much better experience as a team. I don't think it's going to work if either some employees get the option of just never coming in, and some employees, even the CEO, being able to completely, sort of demand exactly what they want to do, and if they want to have meetings online or in person. So I think that's going to be an important part of, and this is where we're kind of also working on our comms as well, as different offices are going back, is that we need to have a compromise there, which is why we're allowing people to work remotely. We're not saying people can purely work remotely. And I think having that data there and knowing that people who are consistently working from home, not having that human interaction, are suffering or not sort of having such strong engagement scores, that really helps bring a bit of evidence and a bit of gives us something to stand behind. We say, look, if you're going to work for this organization, we do have expectations around you for certain reasons coming into the office and having those things. And I think, yeah, a celebration is a great idea. The key is getting people into the office for or even getting people into the restaurant for the right reasons, rather than just saying, look, the CEO likes to come in at least 2 days a week, so everyone else is going to have to, which isn't working for anyone.
That makes a lot of sense. Kind of a related question that I have for you is, how has your remote ability analysis been received by managers and employees? And I'm just curious, how much you've shared about the fact that your decisions around remote work are being, informed by some real data.
So I think the first thing that is good is that I think people have been pleasantly surprised, especially when we start mixing it with the engagement piece, because engagement is very important to us. So every senior leader has a goal around employee engagement. So when we start mixing those things, office attendance or Remoteability around engagement scores and diversity, those things that really do matter and people have targets around, it drives a lot of positive feedback, and I think it kind of elevates it. One thing I would say, especially around the Remoteability stuff, is when we've kind of talked to managers, especially kind of not so much senior leaders, but kind of managers who are closer to the front line, is that it is quite generic data. We're not pretending that these kind of all the data sources we have and the algorithms we run, we're not telling you, right, Tim Peffers, you need to be in 1 day a week, and then Joe, you need to be in 2 day a week. It's really just anchoring the conversation, right? So it's stopping a manager who's like, I want my team in 5 days a week. It's kind of stopping them saying, look, but you only do 20% of your work that needs to be human interactive or in the office, and vice versa. So it's really about putting a data-driven kind of starter, and then it's given us guys, because I think one of the things that we've really we had to push back a lot is, I think the minimum for Philip Morris for the markets is 2 days a week that you need to be in the office. Some markets, especially our Asian markets, have said no, we want people in 4 or 5, but it's enabled the conversation to kind of start at 2, unless there's special circumstances or in the factories. And then I think the most that it's been a conversation. We haven't been able to mandate it. The most we've had is one market, I think, has said, right, we'll have people in minimum 3 days a week. So it started that conversation and giving us some real data to say, right, the starting measure is 2 days a week, and then we can go from there, rather than letting managers do whatever they want, which is traditionally, I think, how often companies work, right?
Sure. And just, is it the manager then who has, besides those minimums, is it the manager who makes that final decision on what the individual will do?
Yeah, so we have guidelines around minimums. We don't have a maximum, but we do stipulate that you're not allowed to force your employees in 5 days a week unless their role requires it, like they work in the factory. And then essentially it then becomes a conversation between the manager and the employee, but obviously anchored by our kind of research and data. And then, yeah, if there is disagreement, I think the manager has the end call. But there's only so much we can do with this data. So, I'll give you an example. Our operations managers theoretically could work from home 4 days a week, right? Most of their tasks could be done remotely. However, our factory managers, our factories are very loud. So actually, you can't just ring someone up or email them. So for those individuals who work in the loud factory, especially our more traditional products rather than our electronic products, obviously they'll know within themselves actually they'll need to be in the factory a little bit more. So we can't prescribe that much detail, so then we know that there needs to be a conversation. It's just really anchoring that conversation and giving guidance that's going to allow them to really think about what are the ramifications of my decision. Yeah, but it has to be customized at the local level. Yeah.
Okay, great. And one thing I wanted to make sure we got a chance to talk about is skills inference. For those who don't want to go the Excel route, who may want to look at a third party to assist them with that. Do you have any criteria that they should keep in mind when they're looking to select, a vendor to work with on that?
Yeah, so I mean, there are some companies who already provide this, and I'm more happy to sort of give names if people are interested who've already pre-built this. If you don't have, it's not a difficult thing to do. If you either want to do it yourselves or engage on a sort of slightly cheaper version kind of get a company to do it or a consultancy. The key is really you'll need to do some kind of baseline. So, you'll need to understand for a certain amount of roles and get the data together and actually, have your training data. But essentially, that's the success lies in being able to access data that is constantly refreshed or really describes, it has a lot of words around what people do. So, objectives are great. Even better than job descriptions. Job descriptions can get a little bit old, or job adverts only happens when you kind of join. So objectives are very good. They're also very honest. So we did originally when we started doing this look at using LinkedIn data, but actually when we talked to other organizations done this, they kind of said, well, people kind of lie on LinkedIn an awful lot. So at least objectives and performance reviews, that kind of data is very useful, and also going to where the work is. So another good thing about skills inference, if you have critical roles, you don't have to do this for the whole organization, right? If you're not, if you're new to this, you can really focus on what are the roles within your organization that gives you your competitive advantage. And then if you really want to break it down, what are the ones that give you competitive advantage and are hard to recruit? And those are the roles that are going to be super important, that are going to be a massive pain if you lose them because they're difficult to replace. And those are the roles that are really delivering your business strategy and give you that competitive advantage. If you just focus on those, A, you could either do it manually, or B, that's where you can really go to where the work is, and you can really get some really good data on what people do. So for example, if you're a fintech or an IT company, you're building apps and so on, a huge amount of your competitive advantage is your developers, right? And actually that kind of digital workplace, those tools they use, Jira and whatever else they kind of do, their project management and their Scrum boards and all those other things, they're going to give you a huge amount of data about, who's working on what are they doing, how much do they spend their time, what roles are they in the develop. So once you kind of focus down more on those roles, that's going to give you a greater degree of accuracy. And that's how I think from an HR point of view that we really up our value. Is it really important that we know, that our people in our retail stores need to be in the retail stores? Not at all, especially if our long-term competitive advantage isn't related to us being able to sell stuff in retail. If it's about product development, let's go and focus on those roles. Let's see what data, let's understand how they kind of organize their work, and then let's get some really good data around that. And that's where doing it in-house can be a lot better than going to an external company, because it becomes very customized and we understand exactly what are the key things that we do and what drives competitive advantage. Yeah.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you so much for going through that. We are about at time, so I just want to thank you so much for sharing this, unique approach, these ideas for companies, but also getting a little bit into the how-to. So our listeners can think about whether this is something they want to work on within their own organizations. I would encourage listeners, please reach out to me if you have additional questions for Tim. I'd be happy to connect you with him to get more information about Remoteability. And I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Madison Biles, who will close out the webinar.
Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you everyone for joining. We have a couple of next steps. We're providing additional content that's in APQC's resource library that you can check out that's related to this topic. If you have a success story to share, please reach out to Alyssa. We're happy to share stories. That's what we're here for. And if you haven't, check out our human capital management research expertise page, and you can see the latest projects that Alyssa's working on. If you haven't already, connect with us on social, and I hope you have a great day.